Hello everyone and welcome back to the Clutch Chess International. We are continuing with the match Levon Aronian versus Alexander Grischuk, and it is one of the games that was most requested, so I do hope you enjoy it as it's quite the treat. Levon with the white pieces opens with e4, and this is game 12 of their match, so the final game of the match. We might cover some others. I still haven't had a chance to go through all of them, but if you know of a good game, do use #suggestion and I will go through your suggestions. And Grischuk replies with c5. He goes for the Sicilian defense with knight to f3, d6, and now knight to c3. So waiting for a moment before striking in the center. Knight to f6 and only now d4. So c captures with queen captures on d4. Usually knight captures on d4 is played, but here Levon has something very unusual prepared with knight to c6, and now bishop to b5 is almost exclusively played here. However, other moves have been seen, like queen d3, queen to d1, queen c4, queen to a4, basically keeping to the light squares. However, here Levon goes for queen to e3, and it is a new move. So already as of move 6, we have a completely new game. Now, what's the idea behind the move? Well, Levon will show us here. However, if your opponent gives you an opportunity to play d5 in the Sicilian, you should pretty much almost always do it. And here Grischuk goes for it, so d5. And the point is, if you just trade everything, captures, 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 and captures, black should have a very nice game. The queen is nicely developed in the center. There is no knight to kick away the queen, so it is possible to go for this. However, after this d5 move, we have bishop to b5. So not allowing black such nice development, and now knight captures on e4, and before recapturing, knight to d4, preparing to capture on c6. So now the point is, if you play something like knight captures on c3, of course white will first capture on c6, attack black's queen. Black doesn't really have any good jumps with the knight, so b captures and bishop captures on c6 check will win the exchange after bishop to d7 is played. So, after this knight to d4 move, Grischuk first goes for bishop to d7, and now knight captures on e4. We have d captures on e4, and now first the bishop captures on c6. Now, you could recapture with the bishop, however, then white captures the bishop, and you will again ruin your pawn structure. So here b captures, and only now queen captures on e4. And now, white is definitely up in development. Black will need a few more moves to get his king to safety. On the other hand, black does have the bishop pair, so if black can just continue developing, get the king to safety, utilize the bishop pair, then black should be more than okay. So queen to a5 check, we have bishop to d2, Levon says thank you for helping me develop, and now queen to d5, immediately offering a queen trade, as it's very dangerous for the black king, still being in the center of the board. And here Levon declines, queen back to e3, really liking that e3 square this game. And now you have to decide, do you want to develop with, let's say, a move like e5, preparing to develop the bishop, castle, and so on. Let's say knight b3, bishop to e7. But now white castles queen side, and you don't really have time for this, because of bishop to c3 will open up a discovery to the queen, and you will go after the e5 pawn. So here black would have to play f6, and then the game continues. It is playable, of course, but Grischuk doesn't think that this is the way to go. Instead, he goes for c5, kicks the knight away this way, knight to e2, and now comes e6. Now he will develop the bishop and castle the king to safety. But now bishop to c3. Levon says, oh no, you don't. If you develop the bishop, then I'm just gonna grab the g7 pawn. So bishop to c6 first, saying that, okay, you're not castling queenside, and you're definitely not castling queenside due to queen captures on g2 checkmate. So Levon first goes f3. Now it is possible to castle kingside, since the f3 pawn prevents checkmate. And now bishop to e7. Grischuk offers the g7 pawn. And now the problem with capturing the pawn is that, well, for one, it's super complicated and you don't want to waste too much time in a rapid game. For example, rook g8, and then you have to decide. You either move the bishop and then you lose the g2 pawn, Or you play something like rook d1, attack the queen, and after queen c4, queen h6, and you get this super complicated game. Queen captures on c2, prevents white from castling, as you would lose the knight here, and it's just really difficult position. Even ideas like rook d2 with a threefold repetition are possible. Check, rook d1, here back check, and so on. So we might even see this. However, Levon is not interested in this. He goes knight to f4, puts pressure on the queen, and queen to f5 now, going for the c2 pawn. And here h4, not allowing bishop to g5 to go after the knight, and also preventing g5. No, doesn't allow this attack on the knight. So bishop to d6 puts a double attack on the knight now, and only now knight back to e2, giving Grischuk the opportunity to grab that c2 pawn. So queen captures on c2, and now rook to d1, attacks the bishop on d6. We have bishop to e7, and now knight back to f4. You don't want it to be a target here if the queen and the king move. And it's also a very strong piece on f4. So Grischuk finally castles, and Levon also just castles. So we have castles kingside, and here you have to decide whether you want to capture this pawn and allow queen captures on c5, for example, captures, and then let's say you bring the rook to help out with the defense of the bishop, and the black should definitely have a good game here, not much to worry about. However, Grischuk played rook f to d8 right away, so now you obviously need to deal with the threat of rook captures rook, as now the rook is attacked twice. So you could trade here, or maybe there's a better idea. Maybe there's a move that is so good that you should even pause the video and try to find it while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it and find the entire continuation, congratulations on being a spectacular player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook to c1. This is what Levon played, and it's really an amazing move. Point is, you have to go back to a4. If you go queen to f5, then g4 traps the queen. You don't actually lose the queen, since you do have rook to d3. You could play this and give up the rook instead, but still, I mean, the game is just lost after knight captures. You can now move the queen, but still, you're down a whole rook. So queen to f5 would have been a terrible blunder. So Grischuk, of course, went queen to a4, but now comes Levon's main idea, which you couldn't play before because of the threat rook captures on d1, but now that the rook isn't on d1, the real threat shows itself. Knight captures on e6, and it's just a terrible move for black to face, because you can't really ignore the knight. There's also a double attack on the g7 pawn now, and you could try some ideas like rook to d5 with the idea that, let's say, maybe queen can capture here, you can bring the rook in and maybe do some damage here. However, then just knight c7 and there's a nice fork, you're going to win one of the rooks. So it's a position where black really doesn't have a good move to play. Also, just you could just capture the rook here, so it's really just a tough position. So what you could do is, let's say, rook d5, the move we mentioned, and allow this fork. You could try queen captures on h4 and give up the exchange this way, so this is also possible. One thing you cannot do is accept this, since it loses the game terribly. But this is exactly what Grischuk did. Point is, queen captures on e6 with check, which is what Levon played. And now the problem is, you could defend the bishop with king to f8, or you could try giving up the bishop. But the problem is, none of this works, because if king to h8, you just go bishop captures on g7, and now there's nothing black can do. You have to capture it. Queen captures on e7 with check, and now it doesn't really matter where the king goes. At some point, the queen will grab hold of this diagonal, and the rook will be able to come to c4. That's the idea. So, for example, king to g8 or to h8 doesn't really matter. Then you're gonna go queen f6 to e6 first. So here, queen to e6 check, king to h8, and now just rook to c4 it's game over for black. Because whatever you do doesn't really matter. You could move the queen, capture the pawn, just queen f6 check, king g8, and rook to g4 will be checkmate. So this is the threat. So after queen to e6 check, of course, Grischuk did not go here. He defended his bishop, but now there's a different idea that wins. So feel free to pause the video and win the game for Levon while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on paying attention, as it's the exact same idea that works. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's bishop captures on g7. So it's the same, as if the king was on h8, only now he's on f8. So if you capture, we go into the same line. And if king to e8, then just rook c to e1. And there's not much you can do to defend against this checkmate. If rook d7, queen g8 is checkmate, the bishop cannot defend, it is pinned. And if you don't defend with the rook, if you, let's say you go queen captures on h4, then bishop to f6 wins. Because, of course, there's nothing to do. Queen captures, and the bishop still cannot recapture. So, of course, completely winning for white. So, Grischuk had to capture the bishop, but now we go into the same line as we've already shown. So, not much suspense here. Queen captures on e7 with check was played. King g8, queen to e6 check, grabbing hold of the c4 square. King to h8, and now, of course, rook to c4, and it was in this position that Alexander Grischuk resigned the game, and with it the match, as it is Levon Aronian who proceeds to the semifinals to face Magnus Carlsen. So here, like we already mentioned, you resign because after you move the queen, let's say whatever you do, queen f6 check, king g8, and rook to g4 will be checkmate. Or if you don't want to do this, you could try and give up the queen. However, it's not much to go with, as after captures, you only have a bishop and a rook for a queen, which is not all that impressive. So, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. So many of you suggested it yesterday as soon as it was played, so I knew it was a good one even before seeing it. But after I've seen it, thank you for suggesting it. I would like to thank Gunnar Lipke, Shubham Sonavani, Mike Hennel King, Your Studio Online, and Chad Piper for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Clutch Chess International, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.